should test it. Maybe I don't.
If I can call us to attention, please.
Maybe I shouldn't
It's
have.
4 o'clock, and our presenters are more than eager to begin. My name is Eileen Meehan, and this is panel 19, Divergent, Convergent, TV Space, Television and Other Industries. We have Randall Nichols. I'm sorry, Randy, I mispronounced your last name. Ahmet, Atay, and Derek Jones. Max Dawson is currently trying to join us, but he may be caught in all this technology. He may be caught in a snowstorm, and which means he might not come, but he might come dashing in at the last moment to present his paper heroically. So we're going to start with Randy speaking on War for Your Screen, television as seen by the video game industry, then move to Derek speaking on how cable companies survive in today's television landscape, and then to Ahmet speaking on The Internet Stole My Soap Opera, explorations on the future of television programming, and keep your fingers crossed for Max.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Is there a compelling reason for me to mic up, or can I just speak really loudly? So I do need a microphone. Okay.
For posterity.
I can do that. Okay, so let's see if this works.
We'll be watching that in 30 years' time, right?
That's exactly what I like to hear. Okay, is this better? Can you guys hear me? Very good. So my name is Randy Nichols. It's Randy Nickens if the presentation goes badly, so thank you for the out, Eileen.
Anytime.
For those of you who are following along on Twitter, I've got my information up here, and if you find that you're really compelled by the slides, it's also available here on my blog. So please feel free to give a look there. So I should confess that part of where I begin is that I actually do not study television. I get one channel and I don't really watch it. So it's a little interesting to me to be at a television conference. In fact, also because then my friends who study television also tell me that they don't identify as television scholars. So there's this kind of interesting discontinuity. Where I start with this presentation, one is with a dare from one of the conference organizers, who I should say thank you to, who asked me to try and come in and offer some specific definition of what television is. And so where I began was trying to think also about, as I was writing about the interconnections between the video game industry and Hollywood, why it was that I had such an easy time finding examples of Hollywood interconnection with the video game industry, but a traumatic time finding evidence of interconnection with the television industry, because Hollywood and TV, at least in the US, seem pretty intertwined. So I wanted to start there. Because I'm in an English department, though, I did want to try and think a little bit as well about how we can think about television from some different vantage points. And the first one was just to try and think about what it is that my literature colleagues would say about the book, which is essentially that their fear that television has killed it, that somehow the book is dead and it's TV's fault. The TV is now where we go to. Of course, they're horribly distressed now that I'm doing video games, which seems like one more nail in the coffin of the book. But even as we talk about film here a little bit, one of the things we can think about is what does television look like from film? And my answer is a little cynical, maybe a little snarky. Just trying to get television, what is it? And what it was, at least that the people who talk about film, as I was in my undergraduate, might have had to say, essentially television's a little box in your house, and it's got little pictures, and that's not terribly important right now. What is important for us, though, is to try and think about how something like video games helps us to explicate what television might be. And so for video games, we've got this kind of interesting conundrum. First thing is that for video games, it seems like there's an inextricable link to the television. For most of us who play video games, the screen we would talk about is the television screen. As we look at industry numbers, one of the things we see is that that PC gaming actually has been in decline now for about 10 years. There are certainly still die-hard players in PC gaming, but the numbers are going down drastically. So to pull back to this notion, as I was writing a chapter for the contemporary Hollywood film industry on the relationship between Hollywood and film, I found that there's all sorts of interplay between the production of film and the Hollywood industry and video games. We started to see over the last decade not only the sort of oft-quoted statistic that video games now outpace Hollywood box office, but we started to see not only that video games are the end of the sort of stream of synergy, which I learned in the last panel is now out of vogue, that video games are one of the sort of outlets for Hollywood production, but in fact, Hollywood production is now an outlet for video games. So we actually see production going in both ways. But it was really strange to me working on this process to see that there was very little examples of how this played out for television. And this is surprising because on some level television seems like it should be ideal, and we can try and look at some great examples of television brands, if I can use that word without actually making myself ill. I'll try and use it a couple more times. Television brands don't do well in the video game industry. Here's Lost, which had millions of followers, and I'll confess as an amateur TV critic, I don't know why. If you need magic, science, and angels to explain your story, that's bad storytelling. That's a story for later on, though. Lost, the video game, does phenomenally badly. In fact, it doesn't do very much better than, really bad conjugation, it doesn't do much better than, say, the video game tie-in for the movie Green Lantern, which, if you know anything about recent movies, you know is a complete bust, and that nobody wanted to see, let alone play. As we try to pull to some other TV brands, we see the same thing play out. The CSI game, which has actually gone on now for 7 years, I believe, or 8 or 9 titles in the franchise, hasn't sold very many. Let me apologize, by the way, as I'm showing you these numbers. The category rest of the world is not my category. This is actually the way the industry reports it. It's not that I don't like you guys.
Thank you.
This is how they say it. I know you're there and I love you. So the same thing happens even when we talk about really phenomenal transmedia franchises, those franchises that Henry Jenkins loves to extol, as bringing the fans in, as allowing us to tell stories across. It seemed like they would be ideal for the video game merchandising notion. American Idol does badly. And I'm trying to figure out why this might be, and I think the logical place to start is to try and think about what it is we know about the games industry. And so this is my favorite slide. It's in every presentation I've ever done, so memorize it if I see you again. You can sing along, we'll hum, play the guitar, it'll be great. The video games industry expressly patterns itself on the Hollywood film industry, and it then concentrates in very similar ways. So there are quotes from, for example, Trip Hawkins, who's the first president of Electronic Arts, and we'll talk about Electronic Arts more in just a second, who tells us that what he wants video games to be is the new form of Hollywood. And what happens is that the industry, particularly to try and deal with some really sort of thorny labor issues, some thorny IP questions, forms a structure that centers power around software publication and hardware manufacture. And so keep this in mind as we start to try and pull out what it is that makes video games thorny for the television industry. When we think about that industry, one of the first things worth noting is that the industry itself does not look like the conglomerates we see elsewhere. So all the companies you've heard about over the past day and a half have no relationship to the major sellers in the video games industry. The one sort of lone standout there is Sony. Sony, by the way, is really kind of struggling. So one of the reasons that we may have some difficulty between television and video games may be that there actually isn't much interplay between the two industries. The companies that are involved aren't quite as involved as they are elsewhere. Although that seems like maybe a dubious conclusion since, as I said, film and television works really nicely together. When we're starting to think, though, about what it is that television looks like from the video game standpoint, the first thing to notice is, of course, that it is a competitor. Television is battling for eyes that video game manufacturers, video game designers want. And so when we talk about these things, we have to keep in mind that we have a limited number of hours in the day, we are audience laborers, and we get to, the one sort of decision we may get out of the process is to think about where we want to do our labor. Do we want to play games? Do we want to watch TV? So keep in mind this notion of competition as well. On the hardware side then, video games represent something of a dilemma when we try to tie them to television. For the hardware manufacturer, the television is the primary screen. We've heard a lot about the notion of the third screen here. One of the things that television's interplay with video games tells us is that, in fact, that notion of using multiple screens at one time possibly hasn't gone quite as far as we'd like to think. That video games are warring for one screen, and if we're playing video games, it actually makes it very, very difficult for us to try and pay attention to a second screen. And this becomes one sort of problematic here, trying to synergize products, trying to get people to play a game or to extend the brand of a television show. Video games don't work very well for that. There certainly are some examples. Matt Payne, for example, has begun to write about Adult Swim and its use of the advertising game genre, but they don't work well together at the same time. We also need to think about the notion of competition again for both audiences and increasingly, or so the game industry tells us, for advertising dollars. One of the things that hardware manufacturers have started to talk about, particularly Microsoft with the Xbox 360, is that they want to think about the Xbox 360 not as a game device, but as what they call an entertainment hub, and when they're feeling really smug, they talk about it as the new cable channel or the new cable box. And so there is a direct competition not just for the eyes of the consumer, but for products, for distribution. This is where cable or hardware manufacturers in the games industry want to position themselves. This also puts them at odds with television. And yet, there is this notion that we need to synergize products. And so trying to figure out how we can actually make sense of video games and hardware requires us to recognize when we talk about television that television is not just the experience. It is not the moment of sitting in front of the TV. It is not the transmedia moment of going to the water cooler. Television is also the giant box that I've so ably directed all of your eyes to. That the technology itself becomes something that video game manufacturers want to synergize. This is particularly true for Sony. When people talk in the video games industry about what the sort of strategies are between the hardware manufacturers, they talk about how the problem that Microsoft has is that they don't understand hardware. And the problem that Sony has is that they understand hardware too well to ever make good content. That every Sony device is designed to maximize every other piece of equipment that Sony sells. So the PlayStation 3 comes out, it is not only designed to play video games, it's designed to showcase their Blu-ray technology, it's designed to showcase the hardware manufacture that they do in terms of memory. All these things come together, and oh, by the way, they also wanted to help sell Sony TVs, which they're partnered with Samsung, I believe, still to this day. On the software side, the situation doesn't get much clearer. For software, television theoretically represents a wealth of content that they can actually mine. One of the problems that the video game industry on the software side has recognized is that content is still king, and the franchise, in the same way that Hollywood has recognized the franchise picture is a really safe bet, franchise video games are more likely to make good money. And so there's this sense from video game developers, and I was talking with one a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how he's dreaming of trying to make a Law and Order video game. I've heard people pitch games for a wide variety of products, things like the TV show Gilmore Girls, which I suspect would be the worst game ever. Imagine the gameplay, you'd have to type your comments really, really fast. There's this wealth of content that games designers want to make. And yet on the other side, we see that despite all logic, despite everything we know about video game narratology, despite what we know about audience preferences, the serialized form of television does not seem to translate well to video games. And if you talk to every single developer, serialized video games is one of the things that they're trying to figure out how to go to. Because again, it becomes a means of building the brand. And so it's a very odd fit that what we discover is that serialized video games based on television do not work. So where I actually would like to conclude is just to try and think about all the things that video games point out to us about television that we maybe tend to de-emphasize when we think about television studies, that it is more than the experience, that it is in fact the technology, that it is in fact the competition for eyes, that it is this nature of the sort of serialized experience, the serialized content. And all of these things from the video games industry are a struggle. And there are things that they're salivating over, and there are things that they are puzzled by. And I think that's a good point for me to pause. So thank you very much.
Yes, it is.
Is that better out there? Are we still getting a hiss from here?
It's me, I guess.
No, there's one of the speakers was hissing. But
Okay, then. I guess I'll sit here. Good afternoon. My paper is entitled How Cable Companies Survive in Today's Television Landscape. And through this paper, I intend to accomplish three separate purposes. First, I'm going to talk about which providers are actually contributing to cable's decline in popularity over the years. And then I want to also explain about what cable companies are doing to remain competitive in the television distribution market. And then I'm going to follow up by offering some perspective that I've found throughout my research for this paper on what cable companies may need to do in the future in order to remain viable. Now, granted, cable TV hasn't exactly gone the way of the 8-tracks and the cassette tapes, but the industry has taken a hit over the past 20 years. According to Parsons' book entitled Blue Skies, in 1991, over 10,000 separate cable systems were operating in the United States, and that number increased to 11,218 in 1995. Yet 10 years later, in 2005, that number dropped to 7,926 systems. A more staggering stat is, back in 1996, cable television controlled 87.7% of the multi-channel video programming market. That percentage dropped in 2005 to 69.4% of the market. Now, as far as which providers are contributing to this drop in cable's market share, well, most of us are aware of what these providers are. One of the more notable ones is direct broadcast satellite, or DBS systems. Now, whenever DBS systems first came out, they were originally intended to provide content to viewers who could not access cable television. So those families out in the farmlands and in the country where the cable companies did not run lines out to those people's homes. So those people would get the small dishes, put them on their rooftops, and they'd be able to get multiple channels that way. This really became an option in the 80s. It didn't really take off well at first because of high startup costs, because of the limited number of channels that the initial DBS systems had. And it really didn't become a major player until DirecTV and EchoStar, which is now Dish Network, came into the scene and started offering the packages and made the prices affordable for families to buy their systems. The one advantage that direct broadcast has over cable systems is that you can pretty much put a dish almost anywhere. And it doesn't necessarily have to be mounted to the roof of your home, because you can actually have DBS systems now that you can carry with you in your car. Okay, so you can actually go on an RV trip and take your satellite TV with you, just like you would watch it in your own house. One stat that I found was that in 2005, 1 in every 4 multi-channel subscribers received digital broadcast satellite service. The second provider, and one provider that's been talked about a lot in this conference, is Internet television. Now, according to Bondad Brown et al., Internet television was described as readily accessible to all those with a computer and Internet connection and does not depend on subscription services. I don't 100% agree with that definition, because in my eyes, Internet television is television that you're watching over the Internet. When you're talking about content that you see on YouTube and other websites like that that you can get for free, that's one thing. But also, I also define Internet television as stuff you can get from network websites, Hulu, ESPN3 for those streaming. To get ESPN3, you have to subscribe to a cable service, which I'll get into in a little bit how that works. But also, even if you're a sports fan, you could get sports programming without necessarily having to subscribe to cable. For example, for any hockey fans who are out there, NHL.com offers a Game Center Live package where you can subscribe to it and get your games online without having to be tethered to any cable or satellite package. So, like I said, this definition, it's right in one way, but like I said, I think a subscription or not, Internet television is Internet television, content that you can get online. One stat here that cable companies are taking notice on is, according to an article written by Dunbar last year, it is predicted that 8.1 million households will switch from cable or satellite to strictly watching their content over the internet by 2014. Very staggering number. Another provider that is an alternative to cable television, but not necessarily one that's really going to make a dent, is digital terrestrial TV. So like your digital channels that you get over the air. Now, it's not really a major player because from what I've seen, this is more of a factor for people who want to get over-the-air television, that live in bigger markets, which have actually more broadcast stations, or they live close to multiple markets where they can get a variety of stations from each market. They could have some choices where if they feel they have enough choices, they don't necessarily need to subscribe to cable. Now, digital terrestrial television, the local stations can air both SD and HD feeds at no charge. Sometimes cable companies will charge for HD feeds that you have to get, but if you get your local station over the air, that HD format is included now. And another thing about digital terrestrial television that not a lot of people are aware of is that stations usually transmit additional channels because they have so many sections in their channel that they can transmit stuff. For example, the local NBC affiliate in my hometown, their channel 6.1 is their HD feed. Channel 6.2 is retro television, which is a completely different channel. And then 6.3 is their SD feed. And then they have other channels too that are open right now that they could potentially use for other channels down the line. This particular technology was actually attempted to be utilized from 2003 to 2007 by a company called US Digital Television, where they worked in 5 markets, the TV stations in 5 markets: Salt Lake City, Vegas, Norfolk, Albuquerque, and Dallas. They worked with these broadcast stations in order to actually broadcast various cable channels like ESPN and MTV and HGTV and those over the air to subscribers. They would have to buy a special box in order to receive those channels. Now, it was a really limited package. I mean, most subscribers only were able to get 20 or 30 channels, and the cost per channel then was higher than cable or satellite, because you're pretty much paying about as much as you would pay for like a introductory Dish Network subscription. You weren't getting nearly as many channels. And eventually the company went millions of dollars into debt and eventually went belly up in 2007. And there have been other companies that have attempted DTV services like this. Sesame was the latest one that I found that tried to do that, but they ultimately failed as well. Which brings us to what cable is doing now to try to protect themselves from the onslaught of DBS and internet television. And one of the things that they've done for a while is they have offered local and long-distance phone services and broadband internet along with their cable. And this was thanks to the Telecom Act of 1996, which allowed cable companies to do that, and vice versa, as I'll talk about here in a little bit. One of the advantages that came about with cable doing this is that anybody who's had cable modems as DSL in the past, there's no comparison with bandwidth speed. I mean, cable modems provide a lot more bandwidth, and also you don't have to worry about interfering with your phone calls whenever you're on the internet. You can actually talk on your phone, and it won't affect your bandwidth. Now, digital broadcast, the DBS systems cannot offer phones, broadband, and TV all over the same infrastructure. They could bundle it together, but it's still separate. Whereas cable can have all 3 coming in through one line, and they do it pretty much anywhere where they have cable coverage. So pretty much all the markets that cable has now, they can bundle these 3 services. Now, phone companies have started to get into the act too. Verizon with their Fios, they can do TV, they can do their internet and local long distance. But Verizon is very limited. As of 2011, their Fios is only available in selected markets in 19 states. And cable's also offering more channels, DVR services, and voice-on-demand services because time shifting is a big factor in people's viewing habits. And then And Comcast, in order to compete with internet television, kind of took the approach, along with Time Warner, that if you can't beat them, join them. So Comcast and Time Warner both went to a TV Everywhere package. Comcast is now calling theirs Xfinity. And of course, Time Warner had their app that they have now for their iPads that we talked about earlier in the conference. Another thing to point out, too, with Comcast and internet television is that with Comcast owning NBC, the potential is there. They can now, or at least they have the power now to control what content from NBC and its networks can be made available online. So what does that hold for the future for cable television? And that's something that we've talked about, not only just cable TV, but TV in general throughout this whole conference. And one quote that really stood out to me whenever I was writing this paper about the future of cable television is, and forgive me if I mispronounce this, but Compare had a quote that pretty much says, TV exists primarily as a metaphor, a model of centralized network transmission and reception with prevailing formal and cultural expectations and standards. And that's based on the fact that, as we talked about throughout these past couple of days, that content is now distributed on multiple platforms. I mean, you can watch it on cable, you can watch it on the internet, you can watch it on a DVD, on DBS, on broadcast. So many different platforms, your iPhone, your iPad. Mullen talks about how there already are indications that future marketplace viability of media content will lie in the flexibility with which the content can be accessed. Perhaps even more than in the nature of the content itself. So it's about, okay, how can I watch this content? I mean, I don't really care what's on, but I want to watch it from my phone, not necessarily from my TV set. Barr and Taplin see cable as becoming strictly a broadband carrier distributing content through the internet. And they explain a business model for this in their work where the cable companies would then offer metered services for their programming, kind of similar to how you pay for electricity or how you pay for your cell phone service now, where you pay so much to watch so many hours of content. Also, time shifting is a factor as well, and more of a focus, and we've seen that with DVR services, with video-on-demand services. Vaughn Rinshaw writes about how cable companies in Germany have started pushing video-on-demand services, which actually distribute the contents to their customers' DVRs during the off-peak hours. So instead of the consumer actually picking it right then and there, they can schedule it to have it pushed later on in an off-peak time. Steinberg actually predicts that one day a person will be able to pause a show on their television and then continue where it was left off on their computer or on their mobile phone. Again, another extension of time shifting. Also, the future of cable TV is for programming to become more interactive. And we've seen this to an extent. Yesterday, one of the presentations was about second screen apps, where you can sit with your iPad and interact with the program while it's going on. Well, Dish Network and DirecTV already have interactive programming built into their system. For example, if I turn it to like NHL Network, for example, a little blurb will come up that'll say, click here to subscribe to NHL Center Ice. Or like a commercial will come on for like a Ford car, and then a little blurb will come that says, press select for more information. So we're already starting to see a little bit of this interactivity. Now, with that being said, it's imperative that companies do research to determine what interactive features the viewers want, because in a study by Simons, he found that people in his study were mostly reluctant to pay for the interactive services because they just want to sit, relax, and not be bothered when they choose a program. Finally, Barr and Taplin talk about having the future of cable TV being a single transmission system of broadcast TV, cable TV, internet, and telco networks is feasible. The combination will depend on who's allowed to access the internet distribution network and who has the ability to program its configuration. So therefore, cable companies, just like any other business, will continually need to determine which platforms are economically feasible for them to transmit their programming and ensure their long-term survival. Thank you.
I am not a PC-friendly person, so let me figure out how to start this.
Oh, slideshow.
Oh, here we go.
And then from the beginning.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start on this computer and then move there just because I wrote something this morning that I wanted to share. This is a project that I started a couple of years ago. I'm looking at the soaps and I better hurry up and finish the project before all of them go off air. So this has been my struggle that I am working while they're disappearing. So let's see how long this project is going to last. I left writing the introduction of my paper to this morning. Not that I'm a lazy person and not that I was procrastinating, but simply I didn't know how to open this talk. I love soap operas. I always had, and I always will as long as they last. I started watching them when I was 13. The glamorous lives of Genoa City residents, Abbotts, Newmans, Chancellors, and Williams fascinated me. Even though I was living across the continents, I was captivated by the lives of the characters in The Young and the Restless. Soon after, I was watching Days of Our Lives, Another World, Guiding Light, Bold and the Beautiful, Loving, and Generations in daily basis. Years later, I still watch The Young and Restless, and few remaining ones. The cancellation of Another World and The Guiding Light deeply saddened me. I confess that I cried while I was watching the last episodes of Irna Phillips's last serial, As the World Turns. Now, even though they are cancelled, I am yet to watch the final episodes of All My Children and One Life to Live. In today's presentation, I question the reasons why my favorite television shows are being cancelled, and I try to answer the question of who the heck is stealing my soaps? A little bit of history. The soaps started in radio in 1930s and moved to the television in 1950s. Irna Phillips, William J. Bell, and Agnes Nixon dominated the soap opera world in television. And most of them sponsored by, as you can guess, the soap opera companies, Procter & Gamble, Colgate-Palmolive, Lever Brothers, and others. And today, none of them are sponsored by any of these soap companies. And during the 1970s, as you see, they even made it to the Time magazine, and they became a cultural phenomena. Even though they are gradually dying, they occupied our cultural milieu. In 2000, we got several of them, which one by one they disappeared. Guiding Light started in 1937 in radio and moved to TV in 1952. As the World Turns in 1956, General Hospital in 1963, Days of Our Lives in 1964, One Life to Live in 1967, All My Children in 1970, The Young and Restless in 1973, and Bold and the Beautiful in 1987. And of course the cancellations arrived. In 2009, in April, The Guiding Light was announced to be cancelled by CBS. Procter & Gamble, as they announced that they are no longer interested in financing any of these long-last serials. And of course there was an uproar from the loyal audience who had been watching them from the first television episode. And if you look at several reasons why they've cancelled, particularly Guiding Light had a low quality, low video, and instead of a lot of interior shots, they used a lot of exterior shots towards the end of their lifespan. And of course the low ratings is another aspect why they were cancelled. As the World Turns, cancelled in 2010, and during this time period, the online movement started to keep the soap operas alive. Keep My Soaps Alive online internet movement has been fascinating work for me that I'm gradually still writing and trying to understand how online forms are impacting the radio, the television itself. And another form of a movement started during the cancellation of Guiding Light was the audience start sending soap bars to the CBS. And of course, as a form of movement. However, they freaked out. They thought, oh my God, this might be poisonous or something in those lines. And as you can guess, FBI was heavily involved in tracking down who is sending these crazy soap bars to the CBS. September 2011, All My Children was cancelled, and January 2012, excuse me for the typo, One Life to Live and Their Lifespan. And of course, it is very interesting to look at the cultural, social, economic reasons behind these cancellations and why they are keep getting cancelled. While I was trying to answer this question, I was also particularly interested in how the social movements were taking place in the cyber world and how the audiences are reacting on these platforms to really fight for their subs and go against the networks. And I came up with 9 different reasons why they are being cancelled. Before I get to there, of course, the whole idea of who is behind of this cancellations, and then what will happen to the landscape of television if we don't have the daytime dramas which dominated the scene from 1950s. And of course, gradually they are being replaced by talk shows, food-centric talk shows, and makeover shows. The first reason is the networks, they are indeed losing their power because of the competition from the cable television. And because of the reasons why they are turning into cheap productions and programming. And while they are replacing these shows, they are also promoting the new ones, again, the talk show-oriented shows and cheap dramas and judge, you name it, kind of shows. The second reason is the lack of advertising. The advertisers are not really interested in promoting or sponsoring these long-lasted shows. The third reason, I think, is one of the most important one, is the changing demographics ones. Clearly, these shows were created for women who were at home once upon a time. Nowadays, nobody is at home to turn in and see these television genres. Therefore, we have more women at workforce. Were less women at home. So, of course, there is an erosion of the demographic. And something that we need to pay attention, the younger generation is gravitated towards a different kind of television genre, which is not the soap operas. The fourth one is a very interesting one, the lack of diversity and diverse representations in these shows. And if you look at them, pretty much they are middle, upper, or upper class citizens, predominantly white, predominantly heterosexual. So therefore, they are not drawing a lot of diverse audience. So that's one of the other reasons why they are being cancelled. And believe it or not, we have living in an era that cultural icons, celebrities, or the artists that we know, they are creating their own drama and their own shows, including the Kardashians. So therefore, they are competing with these real-life situations. Again, the competition from the cable TV is another big reason why these shows are being ignored or cancelled. Again, the competition from the internet and social media, television is have to deal with these new technologies. Even though we are living in the convergence, media convergent era, we have this competition, social media versus the traditional media. Changing viewing behaviors. I watch all the soaps on the computer. I believe there are people who are recording those, TiVoing them, or using other material to, I guess, screen them. And I often watch them with a time lag, so I am kind of behind of catching up with them, but still I watch them online. Therefore, I am not included the Nielsen ratings. So as Eileen Meehan pointed out yesterday, I do not trust their ratings either. So that's another reason, I guess, why they are being cancelled. They are at the bottom pole of the ratings. So these are the 9 reasons that I came up with, which I am trying to formulate while they are being cancelled one by one. And who is stealing the subs? I think it's a web of social, cultural, and societal forces. It's not only the television stations, not the networks, but we are all contributing to this particular movement or the reaction. So, thank you.
And due to our timeliness of our presenters, we have lots of time for questions. Please. Michelle.
This
a question first for Randall. You know, when you were talking about the non-intersection of television and video games, one thing that occurred to me immediately, this has a lot of ramifications, which is gender. Television is primarily female audiences, history not most of the time. Video games are mostly male audience. Seems like there suddenly is no intersection there, and it may have something to do with, you know, their emphasis on character and development rather than action and, you know, and that kind of thing. And the one thing I think that has come away from this may not, you may not find that particularly surprising, but sports, of course, are a genre of being wonderfully successful, and I doubt if it would be if it weren't for television as a mediator of sports. You know, so you know, kind of troubling your categories a little bit.
I intentionally sort of ignored sports in this for one reason. My justification was that what the games generally do is not replicate the TV sports experience. But that actually is the one sort of success story, because we do have that kind of branding out there. You know, the best-selling sports franchise, for example, is built around a televised media personality, and that's the NFL. But again, I don't know if they necessarily sort of link the two together. I will take a little issue with the gender breakdown. Actually, most studies now suggest that the breakdown of game players is something like 45% female, so it's not quite as bad as it is. Those numbers are also a little suspect because what is we tend to study when we talk about people who play video games tends to be the hardcore gamer. One of the things that I always find interesting, and I teach a games course at Bentley, and that's really sort of fun, is to ask the students initially, are you a gamer? And the boys invariably raise their hand, and the girls look at me like I'm crazy, and then I say, well, yeah, how do you play video games? And everybody in the class raises their hand. There's a sort of interesting distinction, and something I'm starting to play with in other research about what this identification means to be a gamer versus just somebody who plays games, the sort of expression of cultural capital that actually is sort of implicit in that label.
I'm one of the people that got all the paperwork trying to say the AC soaps. But, you know, I have it on my business card at my people at the naturopathic community, AC soap, AC soap. But anyway, I'll give you all the cards. I thought you did a good job letting in one aspect. It's not just celebrities, the Kardashians, the reality shows in general.
That's a very good point. That I think more and more we are driven by this reality television genre that is definitely killing the traditional narratives for us.
But absolutely, if they would take into account all the people that are watching it, you didn't also mention the soap magazine account that turns into a 24-hour preschool channel. What children are up at 3 o'clock in the morning at a preschool age usually watching a cartoon?
Well, it is owned by Disney, so
yes.
Here we go.
But if they took all the people that were watching it at the time, it used to only be available at 9 in the afternoon while my children were research. And I think that when they moved it so you could watch it online, that was part of the death of the ABC soap. And they're not counting all the people that are watching. And now somebody put the feed on YouTube, and you can in 2 parts, and you can see that 7,000 people watch Part 1 General Hospital, and now they're split. But I don't think they ever split. I think you're absolutely right. They're not counting those numbers.
That's why the Nielsen ratings is, I think, doing a very injustice for the genre itself, that are not really capable of counting all those who are watching it in a different platform.
And you do know that the reason there was a cliffhanger on All My Children was because they got the rights over to Prospect Park, but then they kind of got stuck there. So, anyway, thanks.
That's for Randy. I was contemplating the comment you were making about the longevity issue of the non-Pacific testing. And I wondered if you had, in your experience teaching, if you had students identify as gamers because they were primarily, well not primarily, but images that modeled their games. And as opposed to, like, I play video games, but I don't model or anything, I'm not that into it. But when I taught writing for video games, the gamers in the class were always models as well.
That's interesting.
Modifiers, it wasn't.
I actually haven't asked this expressly about modding. At the university I'm at, my suspicion is that probably most of them do not mod because they tend to shy away from computer experience. what it seems to be for them is the type of games they play, and that they come into playing those games with a set bit of knowledge about how those games work. One of the places that sort of inspired me to look at this, I referenced Matt Payne earlier. In a previous conference that I was at with him, he was talking about the sort of back-channel communication around Adult Swim Apple games. And that one of the things that the people who played these games, which seem to be casual games, which are generally, at least in the academic literature and then in the gaming world, those are these things that everybody sort of looks down upon. When you talk about how in these Apple games, which these people played religiously, one of the things that they did was they spent a long time justifying how they also played real video games, and used those things as means of sort of putting the casual players in their place about who was king of the hill and who was sort of a real gamer and who was to be trusted and who was not.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it, so you might have mentioned this already, but I just wanted to give you a suggestion. On YouTube, there's a network called Machinima.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not television, but it is serialized content. They are modeling themselves after television and been quite successful, not only creating series using the visuals of games, but also working with game companies to create specific content. And they're doing more of it for the game companies.
And to me, because my background is coming from political economy, the thing that I was really trying to think about is why these two industries that exist out there don't seem to mesh the way, for example, Hollywood film industry does. Machinima is really interesting because it in fact steals the tropes of television and becomes one of these sort of alternatives to television that we've heard so much about today in the last couple of days. But very rarely is it actually built on television content itself. It becomes really strange if you think about the range of TV that we all watch, and how almost none of that has managed to make the leap to merchandising a video game out there. And when it does, I mean, actually, one of the things that I looked out is that the games that are actually most successful from television, that make the leap from television, tend to be very cheaply made games. So if you look actually at the games that have proved fairly profitable, they tend to be really cheap games based on things like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, trivia games that cost nothing to produce. No coming for it.
So, Nikki, you can go before they come.
A question for Randy as well. I wanted to start with Michelle's comment yesterday or two about, television is basically radio because of the nature of seriality. And when you were talking about, TV show has a typical time to be translated to video game, I thought, well, maybe it's because of that property of TV show that, you have to tune in, week after week, or even if you watch it as a whole, there is some sort of repetitiveness of a TV format. That makes it, difficult to be translated into a video game. So I was thinking, if you think about a lot of university curriculum, it seems to me that like television and radio seems to be much more, I wouldn't say a natural mix, but there are still department of radio and television. While, film would be bundled up with visual art or, cinematography. So my point is, well, if I'm actually have a point, my point is, it seems to me that, very often when we talk about technological convergence, we are really ignoring storytelling format. We think that, now you can have your iPad, you can do this and that. So, the content, can be streamed anyway. So it seems to me that, there is certain sort of independency between storytelling and also media format. So, this might, well, I don't know whether it's a comment or question, but another thing I'm thinking is, I don't know if you are counting in Second Life or Series 2 as sort of video game experience, because there are definitely people who like borrow, a character from, a TV show and now on like Buffy the Vampire, like, Tarzan or, like Second Life. So it seems to me that even, media companies or video game companies, they have a difficult time in capitalizing on TV shows, but bands are doing that anyway.
Well, and you hit the end on the thing that I was trying to do, which is essentially to talk about why it is that we don't see media companies capitalizing on video games between these two things. Because it seems to me, this is one of the things that I was trying to raise, it actually came directly out of comments that I've heard in other panels, where we started to think about the various formats for different television networks. So, based on what one of the commenters said in the panel previously, it seems like CBS TV shows, with the exception of their age demographic, would be natural things for these video games because they tend to be one and done episodes. But I don't know even that episodic drama should be problematic, at least that episodic storytelling should be problematic. I mean, if you think about what most involved video games are, they're one level after another. All a level is an episode that you play through. So it strikes me as very, very strange that this hasn't happened. It also strikes me as strange because it seems like one of the things that you could do, and I find myself in really dubious territory here because I don't actually want to offer tips to the industry, but it does seem like one of the things that would be a really sort of cost-effective thing to do would be to actually design a game that you could then add, for example, game mods onto, or downloadable content that was episodic, that would actually then reduce your costs. And so it's just strange to me that nobody's thought of this, and please don't listen.
My question is for Derek. As you probably know, kind of moving heavily right now into the LA community venture consortium with the creative tourism. I was wondering if you've been following or have any comments.
Can you repeat that question?
Canoe Ventures.
Okay.
Have you been following Canoe?
I'm not. No, I haven't been.
Well, okay, well, just probably some consortium things. They were a consortium of the leading, the second biggest MSOs in the U.S. They started with a $150 million endowment with a mandate of organizing a national model for advanced advertising and interactive advertising. And I think it's quite successful in establishing standardizing the technical and administrative infrastructure to bring convention properties to the center. But anyways, this last week they announced that they were going to abandon their interactive mandate. They laid off 80% of their workforce, and they're now shifting their focus to digital event ad insertion video on demand formats. With one of us putting the case of the failure of cable with this social media going slowly enough, this consortium seems to make
Might be an instance of just them trying to just protect their own backyards at this point too. Just to protect their own interests. That's my guess, but it's interesting. You said it was Canoe was the consortium?
Yeah, so it was Comcast, Time Warner, Charter, Bright, Microsoft.
Okay, I'll have to look into that. Thank you.
Just kind of circling back to the issue of seriality in soaps, and just to kind of ask this discussion that was going about them, and I noticed that one thing that you did mention was that, seriality would just move really fast, and so is that a factor, or do you think that there's something specific about that, 5 to 8 soap opera format that's different from seriality?
I think it is different because it is every day and there is a cliffhanger. The format is different. It's open. You have 5 days a week, 52 weeks of a year. So I think the format is different. And in a way, I'm also comparing them to the UK soaps, which they are in the night time, and they are some of them 5 days a week, but they are at the 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock spot, which is completely different what we have here, which is noon, 1 or 2. So therefore, the seriality is a prime time in that sense. But you're right that we moved the genre to the prime time. But I think we couldn't carry on. Like how many primetime shows started in 1952 and kept going, right? So, yeah.
I think I'm at another main difference too between the weekday soap operas and the primetime soap operas are the storylines themselves. Where in a weekly soap opera you could have 1 or 2 particular storylines in an episode wrap up in that episode or in the next episode, whereas in a show like Days of Our Lives you could have the same storyline going on for like 3 or 4 weeks.
And the format itself is open to cover variety of issues, right? The social, cultural, political issues that the soaps to an extent, in a minimal attempt, they are doing it, which prime time, maybe it's not opening itself up for that kind of narrative structure.
I was curious about that thing too. That one of the crucial differences to me seems that you've got this truly ensemble cast. We talk about them now in primetime dramas, the Mad Men ensemble cast. When you think about I watched soaps whenever I was homesick, and to this day still carry a fondness for them. Thinking about the sheer range of characters that had to be maintained is a really sort of interesting moment that doesn't seem to translate well to other media.
It is in this context because, for instance, Coronation Street is started in the 1960s as well. It's going on in the UK with a very, very larger cast than what we have in the United States, and it's going on. And I think the maybe it's in indoor settings, the narrative itself is different. It is, as you said, there are multiple stories going in and out with a large cast. So in a way, it's hard to maintain that in a prime time tradition, I guess.
I think one on the Coronation Street Convergence is more like a little thing. It's way more schedule.
And their ratings is like 5-6 million minimum. Sometimes it reaches to 10 million, and if you look at the population of 55-60 million, which is 10% of the entire population, pretty good to what we have in terms of the ratings.
I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
Yes.
So you think they could keep going?
They could, and I think we are easily giving up on them, that we are not transforming them, but they should be able to keep going.
Well, there's a lot of people that still fighting on Facebook, and it's interesting that you're trying to change ABC by raising the rating of NBC, but they don't take into account that some of those folks that were canceled first can find better networks.
I'm just curious to bring this around to so many of the other panels that have talked about things like YouTube and the new technologies that are, from what I've heard so far, been largely being emancipatory. Do you see hope for soap operas in some new forms? Or
I guess the internet isn't one venue for them to live, which is away from television. The soap channel could have maintained better if you want to have just one channel for them, or move them to a nighttime spot like 6 or 7. Get a newer kind of new generation of audience to carry it on. I think it's easy to cancel something that is deeply rooted in the history of television, and I think we are doing extremely injustice to the genre itself by killing them.
Just on that point, there is kind of move from soap fans to cruise grounds or online. If you Google any soap award media now, award ceremony are on kind of smaller web series that are using network drama. I mean, they're not as expansive as TV soaps. They're much more tour. But fans are thinking about trying to kind of pick up the film and some of the not as that's not as robust, but
that's a good point, but they live this far. So, the cable have been around for a while, and they were able to compete with the cable. And last couple of years, for some reason, the ratings have not been bumping up. So, that might be an interesting reason to explore. And another aspect of it, some of these became global products. Bold and the Beautiful have been successful around the world, particularly in Greece, Italy, and whatnot. So they are able to sell them. So it's not only the U.S. market we're talking about. We're talking about a global, market which, trigger, I guess, the lifespan of these soaps. But again, the nation state is an interesting, idea. Not only the UK, but Australian soaps are doing pretty well as well. So we have examples around the world that they are attracting, newer audiences, while we cannot maintain that in the United States.
We have one here in this country who is monitoring shows to opera and other in fact.
Yeah.
Closing questions? Let's give our audience a hand for being here and our